Hey, Three Crosses family, welcome back to the podcast. My name is AJ. I'm the pastor of life groups and discipleship here at Three Crosses. And today we're continuing our Hope Within You series, looking at 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 16. So if you have a Bible at home, follow along. Get out your Bible, 1 Peter chapter 3. We have a great conversation in store. But before we get into that, we'd love for you to fill out our podcast survey. So you can go to threecrosses.church/podcast. Tell us where you're listening from, who you are. We love to put a free drink in your hand from Neighborhood Coffee. And so we have an exciting conversation about sharing the hope that is within you. And so with that, let's go deeper. Joining us to continue the Hope Within You series in 1 Peter 3, Pastor Danny. Pastor Danny, welcome back to another episode on 1 Peter.
Thank you for having me back on your podcast.
If you remember, maybe 2 years ago when we first started this podcast, it started with a series on 1 Peter.
Look at that. Wow, time has flown.
I know. I forget the title of it, but I'm sure we could look it up and put it on the notes or something. But 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 16 has one of the most infamous passages when we talk about evangelism, and we'll get there, but there's a lot of context around that one passage. And so I want to begin there because verse 8 begins by saying, "Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble." I want to emphasize that word finally because we are jumping into the third chapter of 1 Peter. And so maybe you're not familiar with the book of 1 Peter. And so could you tell us the events that led up to this passage of Peter saying, finally? It feels like we're jumping at the post argument here. So why is he saying finally here?
Yeah. So, we're right in the middle of the book, right? Because 1 Peter has 5 chapters in it?
Correct. Yeah.
So we're right in the middle. Peter's writing this letter to saints scattered abroad. That's where he starts. And so they're all over the place, scattered throughout these different cities in Asia Minor. And he writes really just to remind them of their hope, that in the midst of suffering, in the midst of a world that's hostile to Christianity, he wants to just instill hope in them. And so really, 1 Peter is a book that is important for us to understand, especially if we're in a season of suffering or living in a culture where people are coming against us for our faith. And so Peter has been encouraging these guys, and now he's not closing out the book, but kind of getting to the meat of the argument here as we're approaching the midpoint of the book.
I remember walking through 1 Peter a while ago. It was a while ago, but I remember him establishing a pretty solid foundation, like in a couple sentences, maybe first couple paragraphs. And then it led to a bunch of imperatives of how to live, which is totally Peter because he's such an action-oriented person in the scriptures. And just thinking about all the action items that he's listed so far up to this point. And so if you zoom back to chapter 2, you get a bunch of household codes, you get a bunch of different calls for husbands and wives to live a certain way. And it seems like he's continually saying, because of the faith that we have, it leads to a certain type of life, especially as exiles in a foreign land, scattered all over the place. How do you live well in a place where it feels very hostile to the Christian faith? So,
and then even, how do some of these household codes from the scriptures, how do they overlap with culture? So what do you do when you're a Christian person, but you find yourself in an indentured servitude position underneath someone? What do you do in that case? What do you do when you're in a marriage, right? Peter's the one who talks about when it comes to husbands and wives in the marriage relationship, there are times where you're married to someone who has a different faith than you because you came to faith, you live in this other culture, this person's from the majority culture. What do you do, right? And so he's kind of talking about even how to suffer in the midst of everyday life and how to live for God quietly. And that kind of becomes his theme throughout the book, is this idea of, even with wives and husbands, he says, if you have an unbelieving husband, maybe they'll be won over without words when they see the purity and reverence of your life. And so how do you live humbly in this place and let your hope kind of shine through your humble perseverance as you trust the Lord, even in the midst of a circumstance that you wish were different? And so that kind of becomes his theme that he fleshes out in all these different contexts of life.
So let's talk about this first passage here, because it says, finally, in light of all of these action steps that I'm calling you to take to live a holy life in exile, All of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. You can almost hear him rattling off a bunch of different, platitudes. A lot of times you look at the scriptures and you see a lot of the same encouragements, most notably in Romans 12. And so there's a lot of parallels here. 1 Peter opens with be like-minded. Romans 12 verse 16 has of the same mind. Be sympathetic. Verse 15 in Romans 12, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, be sympathetic with them. Love one another, full of brotherly affection, Philadelphia. Let love be genuine in Romans 12. Be compassionate and humble. Do not be haughty, but associate with the humble. And then it continues on to talk about repaying wrong for wrong. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to stop here with these imperatives here. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Because we're in this series of sharing the hope within you. And one of the things that I was struck by, even in your sermon, was opening with this idea that in order to do this well, we have to be grounded in a church community. And I've been sort of anticipating looking for this one scripture, this one golden bullet of saying, this is the 5-step process of how to do this, with the importance of the Great Commission, with Paul being such a great evangelist, with Peter going to his death, sharing the gospel. I'd almost expect them to say, all right, here are the 5 bullet points of whenever you get into a situation, this is what you got to do. This is what you got to do. This is what you have to say. This is the script. And we've been talking about that a little bit. Instead, you see passages like this where Peter is opening up with this call for church unity. And so is Paul. Romans 12 is talking about the transformation, and Paul lands in the same spot where he says, love, let love be genuine. And he's talking to the church to love one another. So as we're talking about sharing the hope that's within you, talk to us more about why church unity seems to be so critical and at the top of the list for both Peter and Paul here in terms of their evangelism strategy.
Yeah. If you look at the context of 1 Peter, which is what we're talking about here, I just imagine it would be very difficult to live in a world where not many people believe what you believe, right? Especially these people that we've talked about who live in marriages where their spouse doesn't believe what they believe, or they're in, vocational roles where the person they work for doesn't believe what they believe, and they're ridiculed, they're made fun of, right? That's difficult. And so part of it, I do love that when he talks about the relationship that we have with other believers, I think we have to remember just how life-giving it would be to know, especially he starts with that one, be like-minded, that there are people in this world who do believe what you believe and who think how you think, and they worship how you worship. And so let's make sure that we're going to be less discouraged in the world outside the doors of the church if we find encouragement within the doors of the church. And so I love that before he moves into sharing our hope actively, he starts talking about just making sure you're in strong relationships within the church. So like-mindedness, right? Be with people who believe like you. Be sympathetic, right? Have folks who carry your burdens with you and feel for their pain and rejoice with their joy and all that. Have a great community is where he's going. And I think the 2 reasons for that is, one, to give hope to these folks that, hey, there's a context where you can be safe. That's what we talked about on Sunday a little bit. And then second, I think because when we talk about especially roping in Paul as well, when Paul, Peter, the New Testament authors talked about sharing the gospel, it was always assumed that we are sharing the gospel and inviting folks to come join us into the faith community. So we're being saved not just from hell to heaven, but we're being saved into a community of faith. And right, Peter talks about this a lot, right? Once you were not a people, now you're the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. And so for Peter, it wasn't just, well, you were saved, right? You were called out of darkness and into his marvelous light, Peter says, as an individual, but you became a people. We became the people of God. And so imagine a world where you go out and share your faith with someone and they say, wow, yeah, I want to follow Jesus, you're going to invite them back home again to your church community. And so I think that's the other reason that he starts by saying, let's make sure you have healthy relationships there, because the last thing you want is to be part of some toxic church. And then you come and invite someone to come join your toxic church, right? You want to be in a healthy place so that when you go out in the world, you've got hope that you're carrying. And when you invite folks to come back into the faith community with you, that they're coming into a hope-filled community. It's a beautiful place. And I do want to say, when I'm talking about inviting them to church, I'm not talking about it the way we might do today. Because right now it's like, you want someone to hear the gospel. It's really easy to invite someone to church in our context. That's a normal thing people do. I don't think that's how it would be in the first century in this, diaspora community, that you just be like, hey, come to my faith community, right? They'd be like, well, I'm not even a Christian. When I'm talking about inviting folks into the faith community, what I'm talking about is if Peter leads someone to Christ, or someone in his church leads someone to Christ, they're going to start worshiping with the Christians as a Christian themselves now. And so we want to make sure that this place that we're inviting them to join as followers of Jesus is a healthy place.
I think that's such a fascinating concept, because I've sometimes viewed an invitation to church almost as a cop-out. Like, I don't want to do the hard work of sharing what I believe. I just want to bring them to the pews so that they can hear a professional do it, and like it can be a safe environment. And yet, placing yourself in Peter's situation and the book situation of a scattered people all over the place, where there are probably no, Sunday services, and what that would have looked like to invite them into that community, like invite them into those friendships, invite them into those those people who have hope in such a dire situation. I think that is very powerful in itself. It gives people an experience and a chance to belong. And I think that is something that people are longing for, especially in our day and age, of just a place where they can find community.
Yeah. And I think that did happen in those days as well. Like, I don't think it was as binary as you're not coming to church unless you're a believer. There's some of the earliest church writings talk about how evangelism works sometimes in community, where folks start joining the faith community in some of their religious practices, and over a span of months or years, they kind of turn around and realize, like, at some point I became converted. I don't know what happened to me here. And so that was part of the process too. I think we might get into trouble when we make it too black and white.
Okay.
Right. So I feel for people who is like, they just feel like getting someone to church is the end all. And so it's, they have someone at work and they invite them, come to church with me. They finally say yes. Then they come, and like all their friends are praying that they'll have a good experience. And then they come sit in the service, and you're kind of like watching them to see how they respond to the message. And then like, I hope this message is good for non-believers. And
I hope they sing this song. I hope they sing it.
Exactly. They preach the gospel, and you're like, please respond. Right. And then on the way home, you're like, so how was it? Right. And so that's normal. That's a normal human experience. But at the same time, it feels like when that happens, we're placing too much weight on an experience for this person, where again, I think you should totally invite people to church, and I think that's amazing. But I think all of this becomes easier when we realize that God uses all of this. Like, these are all parts of it. So even, I was talking to someone the other day who invited someone to church, kind of that exact thing. Like, it's like, wow, I never thought this person would come. They said yes, they came. And I said, how was it? And the person said, well, after this, I kind of remembered why I don't want to be a Christian.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, oh my gosh, like, should I have invited them to church, right? And at the same time, this is a mature Christian who invited this buddy to church, and he's like, you know what, this is part of the process, right? Sometimes, right, God shows us the truth, and we feel like, I think I want to reject this, and right, and so they know, like, it's not like, well, I guess my work is done, and this person's going to hell now, right? It's well, that was something, and there it is, and who knows if they'll come back, but I think when we put too much weight on the come to church, we put too much weight on the moment they come for the first time. And then it's really like, I just got to get them back. Where what we're seeing in this series and seeing in these different letters is sharing our faith is something that happens organically throughout our lives, where if we're in a relationship with someone, I think of the opposite. I know people who are hesitant to invite folks to church who aren't believers because they're not Christians. And then every once in a while, the non-believer says like, hey, can I go to your church on Sunday? This happened to somebody I was talking to the other day. And they're like, yeah, you can come if you want. Like, it's a Christian church. Like, I just was interested to see what it's like. And so it feels a little more like, well, this is crazy. I don't know what's going to happen. And so then the backside is like, is this person like going to get saved at church? Like, I did not expect this would happen, And so one of the things we're learning is God uses all of the pieces of the puzzle, that we as individuals are part of it. There are other people in the community. The church experience is part of it. The conversations in the world are part of it. Seeing our lives is part of it. Right? That's part of Peter's book too. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good works and glorify God on the day he visits us. And so all of this together is this integrated like life strategy that I think what I'm saying about not putting too much weight in the come to church is like, well, it's the same amount of weight as anything else. Like, that's just part of these relationship building moments where they're going to hear the gospel. And it's a big part. It's a beautiful part. But I think when we make it the only thing or the be all end all, it's kind of like, well, if they never want to come to church, it's like they're never going to hear the gospel. It's like, well, there's other ways for them to hear the gospel too.
Yeah, I think the hope-filled life seems to be an encapsulating term, especially in the curriculum. We use that term because, it's just a part of the rhythm of life that you're inviting people into. And, speaking of rhythms of life, there's multiple rhythms of life, not just church, but there's all sorts of different things. And that's where verse 9 goes, because I'm assuming that church people aren't doing evil toward each other, but there are people outside of the church doing evil. And so the call is, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. And so again, Romans 12:17, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. So there's a lot of relationship to this. Romans 12 again, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. It seems like what we're called to do in this rhythm of life, not only at church, but when we interact with people, whether it's the workplace, whether it's in the community, at home, whatever it is, when we step outside the doors of a church, it's almost like this upside down way of living where it's like, hey, everything in us wants to repay evil with another evil or insult with insult, but repaying evil with blessing. And then on top of that, saying this is what you were called to do so that you may inherit a blessing. And so it feels like the implication of this text is the way that you are able to live such an upside down life, to repay evil with blessing, is because you have your eyes on this inherited blessing and this calling. And so could you help us unpack what Peter is talking about when he talks about your calling to repay evil with blessing, and then that line, so that you may inherit a blessing? It seems like he's fixing our eyes on something deeper going on.
Yeah, and Peter does that a lot. Like Peter, there's a whole kind of sub-theme throughout the book of a couple of things. One is that we're aliens and strangers in this world. We're just these temporary foreign visitors in this place. This is not our home. Our home is in heaven. So we have to learn what it means to live as kingdom citizens here. Also, the idea of a blessing that's waiting for us somewhere else is a big theme of Peter, right? This he talks about in chapter 1. This is this faith or this treasure is kept in heaven for you who by faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the last days. And so there's this idea that there's this inheritance waiting for us. There's this kingdom waiting for us. We're living in that kingdom now, even though we're not in it yet. We're living as people who will one day receive a blessing later, even though we haven't received it yet. And so a lot of this is him reminding them of who they are in Christ as it relates to leaving the doors of the church and going out into the world. And then at the same time, I'm encouraged as we read through these verses here that he's talking about really just what it means to live life as a Christian, right? Have healthy relationships in your church community, live with integrity as you walk out the doors of the church, right? And whether it's inside the church or not, like let's live like Jesus did, where when people hurl insults at him, Peter says, the example of Jesus, he didn't fight back. He didn't hurl insults back. He entrusted himself to God who judges justly. He bore our sin in his body on the tree so we might die to sin and live for righteousness. By his stripes are we healed. And so Peter is kind of saying, look, the gospel happened. Jesus transformed us. We look back to him to see his example on earth. We look forward to the inheritance he's given us, and we live life here in the middle as strangers in this place. And so on one hand, that gives us marching orders, like this is how to live. On the other hand, it reminds us as we're about to go into the workplace or go into a marriage where someone's not a believer and we're a believer, we are remembering that like, okay, well, we're not from here. Like this is, we're just visiting, and we have different code of ethics, code of conduct, and they might think it's strange, but we're going to live this way.
One of the keys in your sermon was having an accurate view of yourself, an accurate view. And I'm imagining that once people leave Sunday, it's very hard to retain that accurate view. So could you help us understand what are some things or what are some practices that we can engage with that help reinforce that accurate view of who we are when we leave the doors of the church?
Yeah, we can go. So between the place where he tells you to be sympathetic, love his brothers, and the place where he says not to repay evil with evil, he has two more things that we should do. And he talks about being humble-minded and soft-hearted. And that's kind of where we got this concept of having an accurate view of yourself, is that humility, in terms of your mind, right, is we kind of link that back maybe with Philippians 2, where it's Jesus who was God himself. He didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he humbled himself, took on the form of a servant, and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So this idea that Jesus was humble-minded, that even more than he's calling us to be, he didn't even look at himself rightly in a sense. He said, you know what, I don't need any of that. I'm going to live as a human on this planet to save humanity. And so for us, like being humble-minded is the command in scripture is don't think of ourselves too highly. So don't think, oh, I'm all this, I'm all that. Humility, I love C.S. Lewis has a quote about humility that says it's not about thinking about yourself as worthless. It's actually thinking about yourself as accurately, right? And so, and this is in alignment with Greek philosophy as well, that humility is really having an accurate view of who you are. And so part of that is like not being all pompous and blown up, whatever. Part of that is connected with what he's talking about, that who we are citizens of heaven, who we are redeemed by Jesus Christ, who we are broken people who are being redeemed and inheriting a blessing and wanting to live on this pathway. And so having the right view of yourself in your mind is connected with that word humble-minded. And then he says to be soft-hearted. And I think that's, for me, that kind of made this great combination of what does it look like to walk into the world as a Christian. It's like, okay, well, I want to think about myself with my mind accurately. And I also, right, so I don't want to put on airs and act like and think like I'm better than everybody else. I also don't want to do that with my heart, whether it's like putting up walls so that I can't be penetrated by other people, or putting up, this pompousness of heart where it's like, you think you're so big and you have this big persona, whatever. It's like, hey, you know what? Keep a soft heart. Be someone who can be affected by grief or pain or sin, in the sense that it breaks you. Be someone who can rejoice with those who rejoice. Don't be that person who, right, somebody has an amazing thing happen to them and you totally don't respond to it because you're like too cool to respond. It's like, hey, have a soft heart and be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, right? Same time, somebody's in pain, mourn with those who mourn. So that at an emotional and mental level, let's not think of ourselves as great. Let's not put up walls. Let's just be real, authentic people as we step into the world outside the doors of the church. And so those are the two terms that I kind of tethered that concept to.
Yeah. And I think this whole series has encouraged me so much because it feels like you can bring your genuine self to these conversations as opposed to, having some sort of agenda underneath. It feels like when I do that, I come to a conversation or I come to a person and I totally miss them because in my mind, I'm like, all right, where's my open door? Where can I get in here? And yet everything in scripture seems to be shouting out like, just be your genuine self, but be interested. The phrase last week, interested people are interesting. Wait, interesting people are interested. I keep getting those backwards.
It means the same thing, yeah. But when you're interested in other people, you yourself become an interesting person that people want to be with. Right. And I think that's a really important point because I think especially, we talked a little bit about the pressure we put on ourselves to invite someone to church and have them have a good experience. I think we put that same pressure on ourselves when we're not at church. If you're talking to someone who's not a believer, we feel this pressure that like, I need to convert them in this conversation. I need to do the right thing. I need to share the right words. I need the script to come out of my mouth. And I think in the same way, that type of pressure is one we need to let ourselves free from. I was talking to somebody this week who has been walking through the small group curriculum with a series. And one of the projects for the folks in the small group last week was to interview someone who's not a believing person, just about their own religious and faith background. And this person said, man, I just don't want to do this because like it's just so awkward for me to enter into those conversations. And I totally understand that because I don't talk to strangers too. I have a hard time getting those things, but I think part of the reason that can be so difficult is because we feel this inherent pressure that like, well, if I'm asking you about your faith, I have an agenda behind it and I'm going to have to share mine too. And you're going to see my agenda, smell out my agenda, whatever. But this idea of like being soft-hearted and humble-minded, it's like, well, actually, no, like you can just be curious about their faith and take the pressure off and just say, you know what, I'm not going to try to convert this person today unless God puts it on a golden platter. Like, I just want to know, like, hey, so, do you have a faith background? Did you grow up like, and if they get all weird about it, like let them get weird about it. Like you're not trying to pressure them to have a conversation they don't want to have. You're asking them about themselves. Like, hey, where did you grow up? It's like normal basic questions that I think sometimes those questions are weirder to us than they are to them because for us, we feel the pressure that I'm bringing this up only because I want to convert you with this information, where for them, they just thought you were interested about them. So like, what if you actually were just interested about them? you might have an opportunity to have a great conversation and learn some things about them and their background and their faith background. And who knows, maybe they'll ask you about yours, maybe they won't, but regardless, you've built into this relationship and, started setting the tone of like, this is a relationship where we can talk about things that matter.
Yeah. And that's why we even created it as an interview assignment too, is because
it's a one-way conversation.
It's a one-way conversation.
I just want to hear about
listening. You're taking notes. You're not even
think like so many, we talked about this this week as a staff, but I think so often many of us who grew up in church, grew up in cultures where there's so much pressure to close the evangelistic sale that we can't even interview someone like about their faith experience because we just feel that sales pressure, even though there's literally none, like, because it just smells like evangelism to us, and evangelism to us freaks us out because we feel like there's going to be some sales pressure at the end, where, it's like, imagine you're like a used car dealer or something, and you're in a used car dealership and you go to somebody and be like, hey, what car are you driving now? It's like, they know you're there because like you're trying to like sell them a car. It's like, but if you're a used car dealer and you're hanging out with someone at their house and you're just in a relationship and you're like, hey, so like, what car do you drive? Like, I work in the car world. It's like, there's a way to have that conversation. They're not going to think you're trying to sell them a used car. They're just going to think you're interested because you're someone who's into used cars, because that's like what your profession is, And so I think we a lot of times bring that baggage to the conversation because we've got all these bad experiences and pressure that we felt in these evangelistic trainings we've done in the past, where it's almost like part of this like interview exercise is one that's actually really healthy because it reminds us that like you can actually talk about faith without making it weird for them. Like you can just be asking them a question. Like it can be just as normal as asking them, where did you grow up? Did you grow up going to church? And that's an encouragement I have for anyone who's wanting to grow in evangelism personally or faith sharing personally is learn how to ask some of those really non-threatening questions and see what happens. So like I'm talking to somebody new and I'm in a new city and whatever. It's like, I'm not gonna ask them like, hey, so do you have faith in our Lord Jesus Christ? Like as I meet this person
right off the bat.
I might, so depending on the city and the conversation, it might feel appropriate to say, hey, do you go to church around here? Or, hey, like, when they say, hey, you're a pastor, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a pastor at a church. Then it's like, it opens this door to say like, hey, do you know any churches around here? Like, cause I'm interested in that. And it's like, I'm not trying to sell them anything, in that conversation. I'm wondering where it's going to go, but, I think it's funny because even the people who are the best at sales in the real world, like salespeople, really recognize like we're just building great long-term relationships with folks. And right, like I know people who are great at sales, and it's like every once in a while I wonder like, are they ever going to try to sell me anything? Like they're a salesperson, but I'm like, I think we're just friends, and then it's like, but then the next time I want to buy a car, I'm like, oh, I know this person who sells cars, I should call them,
Right.
So part of this is like in building relationships with folks who are far from faith. Some of it is God will give you opportunities to have great conversations substantially about faith. Other times, like they'll find out because they'll ask you questions about yourself, that you go to church, that you're religious, that whatever it is, and you're just friends. And then someday they're going to be, this happened to us the other day. Somebody called and just said, hey, I'm looking to start going to church. Can we come to yours? It's like, wait, what? Like, you're not even a religious person. Like, I know, but I just thought we should probably get my kids in religion. And it's like, okay, well, we just know that you like your church, so we thought we'd go with you. So it's like, sure. Yeah. Like you could absolutely come with us. And so we weren't literally trying to sell them. We never had a sales meeting with them in terms of Christianity. We were just friends. But then they had a moment in their life where they had a need for a church community and they knew we had one. And so they reached out to us. So I just think I think even if you do view the gospel through the lens of sales, it's like, don't view it like we're these like cringy used car salesmen who won't let people off the lot and we trick them. And it's like all that stuff. It's
a lot
like
of trauma in that comment
let's be like the CarMax people who are just like, hey, we're here. Like we sell cars. We want to give good prices. Here's what the prices are. If you want a car, let us know. We're not going to do anything weird and haggle with you and trick you. And like, we're not going to show up at your house and be all weird. Like we'll just give you a car and we'll tell you what it costs, And so part of it's like, even if you're a car salesman, you can be like a life-giving car salesman.
Right. There's a lot of trauma in that because we do have a CarMax car and it was delightful.
It's the best experience. I mean, hey, I'm sure there's other dealers that do it like CarMax, but man, some of my worst sales experiences in my life, like I've never felt like a hostage in a POW camp more than being at a car dealership. And it's like they wouldn't let me. I was trying to buy a new car, like that I had ordered and they delivered it to the dealer. I was just going there to give them a check and pick it up. And they kept me in there for hours. They wouldn't let me eat. They wouldn't let me leave. And I'm like, I felt like I'm being tortured. And I finally said yes to everything they were trying to sell me, once I found out that I could cancel it, then I drove off the lot because I was trapped in their room, and I called and canceled everything they sold me. And I'm like, but that was the only way out. It was so high pressure. And so, yeah, that is not what evangelism should feel like. It's like evangelism, like the evangel is the good news, right? And so like sharing the gospel should be more like telling someone my wife is pregnant than like selling them a used car. And so it should be news that's exciting to share, that's life-giving, right? And so we know there's a dark backside of the gospel, which is like, you know, it shows our own flaws and insecurities and our sin and all these things. And obviously there's, you know, that's a hard conversation for some people to have, like the idea of forgiveness and God and all that. But it is at its core good news that Jesus has come to rescue the human race, that God, I love how Patty put it this week. She said the gospel kind of in a nutshell is that God wanted to rescue the human race at cost of his own life. That's kind of like the core of this message. It's like we have a God who came to rescue us. And so that is good news. That I just think if it feels real scary or bad or high pressure to share, we might be imagining it wrong, because it's really just, it's good news.
Yeah. And I think it's so significant that like you're not really going to find a text in scripture that like outlines the 5 bullet points of what exactly you need to share in these situations, but you will find all over the place how you're living, how you're in relationship with others, how you're, you know, repaying evil with blessing, all these different encouragements of how to live the hope-filled life and how to live out the hope that's within you. That's why
that's what I feel like I love about where we're going in the small groups, where we're going in the series and the podcast, is like, there's so much more beauty and there's so much more effectiveness when we live a fully integrated life, that the gospel just flows naturally out of everything that we do, right? Like Austin talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? Share the gospel when necessary, use words. It's like, well, the gospel is words, right? But at the same time, there's this concept of, hey, we're living these good lives. We're thinking of ourselves rightly. Like, we're good people. We live with joy. We have a hope within us. We live differently than the world. We have good relationships with non-believers. We're not weird, right? We're all of these things that are part of this concept of conversations about faith, inviting people to church. Like, that's all part of it, but they're just parts of it. And so that's where I feel like sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we put too much pressure on one aspect of it, whether it's closing the deal at a sales conversation or inviting them to church. I also think we put too much pressure on us when we try to like compartmentalize stuff, right? I know people who are on the opposite. We're like, no, you never invite non-believers to church. Church is for Christians, for discipleship. That's our mission field. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. Like, every church kind of has to decide like how often it's going to share the gospel and how often it's going to be, you know, speaking like they're speaking to believers primarily. But at the same time, like, do we have to create all these weird rules for ourselves and like live in these boundaries that we don't see in the scripture, where it's like, in the early church, they're inviting people into the community. Like,
kind of meshes together.
It's everything. If you're just living life on mission wherever you go, whether you're at church or home or at the grocery store, like you're one of God's people living with his spirit within you wherever you go. Why do we have to create all these rules around it and then make it all super high pressure for ourselves or high pressure for them? Why can't we just do what the scriptures talk about, which is just living a holy, honorable, humble life that's filled with hope, that when conversations about faith come up, we take advantage of those moments. We live in such a way that we can cultivate those conversations as often as possible. We invite folks to join us wherever we're going if they're interested. Like, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to have all these boxes that we shove stuff into. It just seems seems exhausting.
Breath of fresh air. That's what this series is.
That's right.
Well, verse 10, Peter decides to ground it on a very specific text. So I'm going to read it and then ask a couple of questions. For, quote, whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And so here we have this quotation from Psalm 34. Psalm 34, grounding Peter's statement of, hey, we want to unite as a church. We want to live righteously as a church. We also want to live with this upside down mindset of repaying evil with blessing, knowing that one day the Lord will distribute justice. The Lord sees the righteous. The Lord sees the evil doer. And yet I'm struck by the opening line where it says, whoever would love life and see good days. The implication there, hey, if we love life and want to see good days, then this is the way we ought to live. And yet I'm thinking now of the context here, because I think the pushback against even the conversation we're having is, man, there's something in us that is afraid of conflict, afraid of pushback itself, afraid of maybe even going so far as to say persecution. And so I'm wondering if you could shed light on Psalm 34 a little bit and how that might nuance what the call is to, based on our conversation of living this organic life of, hoping and praying that spiritual conversations come up and taking the opportunity. I think one of the biggest hurdles to that is saying, man, I don't know if I'm ready to do that because I don't know if I'm ready to face rejection. I don't know if I'm ready to face maybe the opposition that might come. So help us understand why Peter is alluding to Psalm 34 here.
I mean, Psalm 34 is a psalm of David, and one of the things that strikes me in the psalm is that he talks about kind of teaching us how to taste and see that the Lord is good. And so, even as you're reading those first couple verses of it, I'm thinking about part of the pushback is like, okay, well, the Christian life is like a slog, right? So it's like, and everybody in the world gets to do whatever they want. They're like living these great lives. And then we got to live like these morally upright lives where we, we don't even repay evil with evil. We don't have to do anything fun, And so I love that Peter's actually saying like, hey, you've actually got a life-giving way to live. Like you want to live a good life. You want to see good days. Let me just tell you the pathway to get there. It's actually living a righteous life. And so I feel like there's a breath of fresh air reminder that living for the Lord in the midst of this world, even though it's foreign, even though it feels strange, even though you might feel like, oh, everyone says this is the worst way to live, it's like, honestly, it's going to be a better way to live, right? And I think part of that, the longer you live, the more you realize, like, I'm okay being who I am because it's not just because it's true, but because it also is working, it's like, yes, we face suffering, we face like these different terrible things in life, trials and all of these things as Christians, but God gives us hope in the midst of our trials and he redeems us in our trials. We live this way, and it's difficult to make, carve out time or money, all these things for part of like the worship experience. But at the same time, it's like, I wouldn't trade that for anything. It's like you live like a believer for years and you look back, especially as you watch people in the world, it's like, man, I talk to people in the world all the time who it's like, they're having a really hard time. Like they have like not a lot of hope. Their marriages are struggling. They just can't forgive people. All these things that Christianity has helped empower us to do better, they haven't learned yet. Mm-hmm. And I feel for them and just think, man, like this, if you were walking with the Lord and learning some of these things that I've learned by walking with the Lord, I don't think you would be in a lot of these predicaments right now. And so part of it, the longer I live and you kind of look around at the people who grew up with you and all this, it's like, man, like I think we're doing great. Like some people have more money than us, obviously. Some people have more, whatever, lots of different things than us. But it's like, I wouldn't trade this way of living for anything. And so in terms of like the rejection, that's where that gets a little easier too, right? As you get older, you don't fear the rejection, but at the same time, you realize like, it's like being a parent, being a grandparent, like you can't force anything on anybody. So it's like, I'm not even trying to. It's just, I've got advice to give, spiritual advice. If they want it, I'll give it to them. And if they take it, that's up to them. And if they don't take it, they don't have to. Like, I'm not trying to pressure them. Like my identity doesn't rise and fall on whether or not they listen to how I responded to what they said, and so even it's like, somebody might make fun of me for being a Christian. And I'm like, well, and I'm just thinking, well, I mean, you can make fun of me all you want. Like, it's not like I'm going to change that. I'm not ashamed of this. Like, this is by far the best way to live. And it's true. And it's changed my life and changed everyone in my family's life. So you can make fun of it if you want. That's on you. Like, that doesn't affect me at all. Like, you can make fun of me all you want. I think part of that is just growing up and growing in maturity. And so right. I think the rejection that's more scary is if you sit down with someone and say, hey, it's time for you to come to Jesus. It's time for you to come to church with me. It's time for you. Like, we need to have this conversation. Like, you're a sinner. God sent Jesus to die for your sins. If you believe in him, you'll have new life because of his resurrection and his death that paid for our sins. I'd love to pray a prayer with you right now. It's called the Sinner's Prayer. And if you're willing to pray it, you'll be saved. Will you pray that prayer with me? Like, that feels more like a sales call rejection where they can be like, yeah, no, which is like, I've seen that work really well with people, but that's a different kind of rejection. Like you're trying to sell them something in that moment, something good. And you're like, oh my gosh, then there's micro moments, right? You're like, hey, would you want to come to church with me on Sunday? They're like, oh yeah, I'm really not into that. It's like, I just feel like the deeper your relationship is, the more like you're not tied to the results, the more it's like, yeah, no problem, but the more that you're like consumed with like, I have to get them to church. They have to say yes. Like, you're just going to feel like the world is on your shoulders if they say no to you. So I don't know. I think on one hand, that fear of rejection is absolutely normal. We all hate that. On the other hand, sometimes I think about when it comes to this topic, part of the reason we have this fear of rejection is that we might be trying to sell something too hard. Or what if the gospel is less like a product that we're selling and more like wisdom that we're sharing? The gospel is news to be shared, not a product to be sold. So I just feel like you don't get rejected when you share news, whatever. But I just wonder, is there something when we face that fear of rejection, is there a chance we're thinking about it wrong? And we're still thinking about that we're trying to sell them this product instead of we just want to share some spiritual wisdom and share them the hope of the gospel.
Yeah. And if there's any generation that should fear, it's probably this generation in the church that's scattered and facing tremendous persecution under the Roman Empire of just like all the things that they had to go through. I mean, obviously in America, we are pretty comfortable. Around the world, we're seeing a lot of persecution of people sharing their faith.
Well, and it's funny. It's like, so right now it's like you can go out. Austin was talking about the street corner preacher with the box and the megaphone. It's like, you can do that. And nobody's you're not going to die for that. Like people will probably throw stuff at you and yell at you, but you're not going to die. You see people on YouTube or on these shorts all the time where like, they're just trying to be inflammatory, showing up at college campuses, putting up these inflammatory signs against culture and getting into arguments with people. It's like, okay, well, you're allowed to do that in America. Like if you did that in the first century, they would kill you. Like this is what happened to Stephen. He shared the gospel out loud and they killed him, And so like you would expect, and God used that martyrdom to bring tons of people to faith. Yep. So you would expect that if that is what God's calling us to do, you would have all these stories of people who just get up there and they unashamedly share the gospel. It's like, you don't get a lot of those stories. Most of the time, the Christians in the first few centuries during this intense persecution, they lived underground. They kept their faith quiet as much as they needed to. They looked for opportunities to share it in a way that's as safe as possible. Like if they ever got to a place like Stephen, or like they're in the Colosseum and they're about to be killed for their faith, they're going to declare Jesus. They're not going to renounce Jesus. But they didn't use like public inflammatory preaching as a tactic, even though the martyrdom that would happen when they would do that would be kind of the seed of the church. And so you just kind of wonder, well, when we do it today, is it a real godly thing to go out with a megaphone and scream at people? Like, why didn't like the early church do that? Like, is it just like, you feel like you're a martyr, like you're just conjuring up suffering, but you're not really suffering. No one's really going to kill you. You're just going to get a bunch of likes on YouTube and people are going to yell at you and maybe you're going to like that. But it just feels like why don't we stick with, when these folks were in culture, they quietly lived out their faith, shared their faith, built relationships, and the church spread like wildfire, even in the midst of persecution. And hey, if he renounced Jesus or died, they're going to still proclaim the gospel. Stephen obviously has this bold speech where it's like, you know what? You put me on trial. I'm out anyway. I'm just giving it all I got, right? It's like,
even he didn't try to manufacture that.
No, it's like he was in a moment where it's like, dude, they're going to kill me. I'm just going to share everything I got before I go, And so it just feels like, why are we manufacturing this stuff that the early church didn't even do, or the people in the scriptures didn't even do? That's not really what God's calling us to do. God's calling us to live life like he prescribes in the scriptures and like we've seen lived out in the apostolic church and all these things. Which really wasn't, it was a beautiful life. It was caring for the sick. It wasn't megaphones and picket signs.
Yeah. And I think that's the encouragement of that last part of Psalm 34, the Psalm 34 quote, "For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are attentive to their prayer." Insinuating that like, even though the church was underground, even though the church was living quiet, humble lives, it's like the Lord saw their quote unquote platform, And so there's something about the humility again that I think is really important to this text. And yet I do think Peter continues to talk about fear in this situation because that is a very human instinct. And he goes on to say in verse 13, "Who is going to harm you if you're eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you're blessed." Quote, "Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. And so you might be thinking out there, okay, I get living church life. I can do that. Blessing evil. It might be hard, but I can do that. Living righteously, sort of this quiet, peaceful life. Check, I got that. But man, speaking out, like as soon as I have to put words to this hope that I have within you, that's when things go awry, because there's some sort of roadblock of me communicating this. And so we are one verse right before we get to that all-important verse, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And it feels like he's already preparing us for that moment, trying to weigh the costs or weigh what's going on. And so you talked about these golden moments in your sermon. And I'm wondering, how can these verses help us wade through the costs of what's going to happen, of actually opening up your mouth and speaking boldly about what you believe and about what you hope? Because I feel like there's that roadblock there of like living great lives, doing everything righteously. I can do that through the Spirit. But then when I get to that moment when I have to finally give an answer, it feels like there's like panic.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I mean, there always probably will be panic. You know, I think of anytime I've had an opportunity to share my faith, there's a little bit of panic. But I love the progression he takes us, because like that question of who's going to harm you if you're eager to do good is kind of like, hey, what I'm saying is go out and live a godly, beautiful life. Like, you're probably not going to face persecution for that. And if you do, it's like, well, you're still blessed, but you probably won't. You know. So I was just thinking. I was watching a show yesterday. It was one of those like kitchen nightmare or whatever kitchen competition shows. And there's this woman who's trying to like create this dessert for the judges, and she like realizes, oh no, I forgot to grab butter as one of my ingredients. And like, what am I going to do? And so they come to her like, what are you going to do? She's like, I'm just going to try to borrow butter from one of the other contestants. And they're like, oh, good luck, right? It's the finals. And so then she goes to the gal behind her and says, hey, can I borrow a tablespoon of butter? And the girl's like, no, absolutely not, right? Like, no way. Like, I'm not going to let you do this. And so she's like dejected. And the girl's like, hey, listen, if nobody gives it to me, I'll find another way. And so then she goes to the other guy, the third guy in the room, or the third person in the room, and she goes to him and just says, hey, can I borrow a tablespoon of butter? No. She didn't even ask him. So when she gets rejected by the girl behind him, the guy behind her throws a stick of butter to her, and she catches it. And she's like, oh my gosh, thank you. And she like makes this dish. And so then the cameras all go to this guy, like, what are you doing? He's like, it's like, listen, honestly, I don't think like she's going to win or lose with a tablespoon of butter. At the same time, and this just feels like very like 1 Peter. He's like, at the same time, he's like, you know what? Like, I'm here to find out who's the best chef. I'm not going to win this way. And I'm a good guy. I'm not going to live this way. Like, I'm not going to be the guy who withholds something that I have for someone else to force them to lose so that I can win. Like, what do you win when you win that way? Right. And so you could just tell he's like, I know I'm a good person. I don't care if I lose. My values are different. And so I was thinking about that in this Peter sense of like, dude, this guy does a good thing. People throw shade at him. He's not a competitor. He's not whatever. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, anyone who's watching the clip is like, this guy's the man. Like, this lady was like terrible. And you know what? Like, then they come to him like, tell us what makes you do something like this. Now he has this golden opportunity, right? He's like, I just want to be a good person. And so it's like, you just imagine like, this is like the Steph Curry after a basketball game. How did you do that? Hey, give God thanks in all things, right? It's like, I've gotten a golden opportunity to tell them the reason, right? So if this guy was a believer, he would have an opportunity to be like, hey, I'm a Christian person. I just believe in helping people out and not judging them. And, you know, it's like that they have an opportunity to open the door to your faith. And it's like, they could make fun of you, but at the same time, you're making fun of the guy who just gave butter to somebody. Like, don't make fun of that guy, you know? So that's where I just feel like Peter's saying, listen, when you live this way, yeah, they might make fun of you for it, but like, everyone knows that you're like, that's not worth making fun of you for. Like, and honestly, you might actually get these opportunities to share hope, especially if you suffer for doing good. And people are going to listen because you just backed it up with your actions.
So we finally land on the
Here
big
it is,
verse.
3:15.
3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. And so going back to the small group curriculum, even, we've talked about so many areas where hope can emerge. So even in this conversation, we've talked about like the hope that lies within your church community, the hope that lies within us, the hope within your lifestyle, the way you act, the way you see the world. hope within your own heart that has led to your own transformation, and seeing that Jesus in the gospel is responsible for everything. And so one of the things I really appreciated is listening to you come up with all these sample responses of how to do this well. Like, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Because I'd imagine people can hear this verse and go back to that sales pitch, or go back to that rehearsed moment of like, this is in my head. And yet it feels like the responses that you're offering are just so much more plain, so much more organic. They seamlessly fit into the conversation. And, one of the things we even wrestled with this week is identifying your testimony, identifying the different ways that the Lord has worked in your life and the Lord has met your different needs. And so how do you navigate preparing to give an answer? How do you do it in such a way that fits so seamlessly into the prior conversation of the relationship that you have been building?
I think part of it, two thoughts. One, we talked at our sermon review this week about sometimes it feels like there's this pressure in those moments to like share everything about the gospel that we know all at once, and I said the image that I get in my mind is one of those movies where you're like trying to hack into some computer system, and it's like you like open up the firewall and then you got to get this USB drive in there, and like it's got to upload before the firewall closes or whatever. It's almost like you have this opportunity to get all the gospel out. So you're like, oh, let me just tell you in Genesis chapter 1, right? And you can start sharing the entire Bible, right, the entire gospel story. Or like sometimes, because we believe that the gospel, Paul says the gospel, we're not ashamed of it because it is the power of God for the salvation for those who believe it. That like, since we believe that the words of the message of hope are so powerful, we're always like, how can I be so precise with them? So it's like, I need to take them down the Romans road model, or I need to tell them about creation, fall, and recreation, or I need to tell them about the death of Jesus and how it pays for our sins, and we're all worthy of death. Like, there's this whole thing that we do. So what's fascinating to me is as we look at these accounts in the scriptures, we don't see that even the apostles, some of the best evangelists who've ever lived, were that consumed with getting it all right the first time. Right? So next week we'll talk about this in Acts 17. Paul's on Mars Hill, and he has an opportunity to give a speech, a religious speech. And he like omits so many important parts of the gospel. Like, he never talks about the cross, right? He never talks about like creation. Well, I guess he kind of does, but he misses some of these parts from where if he was in preaching class in like my seminary, he would get a real bad grade for the Acts 17 sermon, because the professor would say, great try, but you forgot penal substitution. You forgot the atonement. You forgot
the Holy Spirit.
Like the Holy Spirit. Like, you forgot these critical aspects. But for Paul, it didn't seem like he was trying to upload the whole file in one like USB drive. It seemed like he had an opportunity, and it's almost like this stewardship of God. What do you want me to share with these people right now? And so I think for us, as we enter into those moments, sometimes we can prepare, and sometimes we can daydream and prepare about, hey, what would I ever say if somebody asked me like, hey, why do I go to church? I think it's good to think about those things and have an answer ready. I think the best thing that we can do though is to be honest, right? Because I think a lot of times somebody asks us a question, and like the evangelism circuit turns on in our brain. We're like, okay, I got to jump to the gospel. And so you're like, oh, why do you go to church? You're like, well, God created us to be in a relationship with him. And it's like, and the people start looking around like, wait, that has nothing to do with going to church. What is this? It's like you've turned into some like evangelism robot all of a sudden. But like if somebody says, why did you go to church? Why do you go to church? And you're like, you take a moment and think about it. And you're just like, well, for me, like I remember I first got invited to church. I actually wasn't into it at all. Like I thought it was super weird, but I went a couple times, and something started changing in me. Like I just felt like, man, these people are really good people. This message is really helpful. And God just started changing my life as I would start going. And I kind of like fell in love with going because of what was happening to me as I was there. Like that's just me thinking, I was just thinking through my own experience of coming to church as a 17-year-old. But just telling the honest truth. And so I do think like, instead of punting to like the gospel script, what if instead we just share the truth as we've experienced it, and trust that if we are legitimately converted ourselves, when we tell the story as it relates to our conversion, it's true. It's like, because it's the real gospel that happened to us. And I think taking the pressure off that it's like, you probably won't share the whole thing every time. So if someone just says, man, you seem like you've forgiven these people who've like done all these terrible things. How do you forgive? It's just like, well, hey, honestly, I'm a Christian person. In our religion, we believe that we have to offer unlimited forgiveness because Christ has forgiven us. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's it. That's all you're going to share. Cause like they just ask a simple question. Here's a simple answer. It's totally true. And it's like, they can totally make fun of you for that if they want, but it's like, well, you asked, that's literally true.
My instinct is to immediately ask why, which I'd imagine for somebody else, that would be the question.
Yeah. And they can start interrogating Christianity, which actually kind of gets fun at that point. If they're like, wait, hold on. So like, you have to forgive everything. It's like, well, honestly, I've never felt pressure to forgive. I feel freedom when I forgive. You just keep it grounded in reality. And that's why I think the most important thing we need to do is have genuine faith in Jesus that has converted us, because then we can share about how the gospel has interacted with our lives in a true way. So it's like, if you go to church, but you're not a Christian person, like you actually have never exerted faith in Jesus, you've never experienced the renewing presence of his Spirit, you haven't stepped into baptism and in obedience to Christ, like you haven't walked through the motions of faith and experienced faith as God has designed it, it's going to be really hard to give a genuine answer because you haven't experienced faith yourself, right? And so you're kind of stuck with all this textbooks that like, I don't know, Christians are supposed to forgive, or I just try to be a good person or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, if you're truly in a dynamic relationship with God through Jesus Christ, you can share your experience. And, it's kind of like in culture, people say, well, just share your truth, share your truth, share your truth. It's like, well, okay, well, there's capital T truth. It's not just like your truth. But at the same time, like you've lived in the capital T truth of the gospel. You can share your experience, like your truth, as the culture might say, and it's still true because it's your life reflected through the lens of the true gospel. So I do think we might be able to take the pressure off to just say, if somebody asks us a question related to faith, just answer honestly. And if you have no idea why you go to church and you hate it and like you wish you didn't have to go, that's a different issue, right? Like that's like that's not a gospel issue. That's like, I don't think you've encountered the gospel yet issue. So I think you might find out what you believe too. If like maybe you're a really moralistic person, you're like, I go to church because I want God to accept me, and then they have to share the gospel with you, but that's part of it, is like, know the gospel, be transformed by the gospel, and then share about, like we talk about our testimony. It's like, what's the true answer to this question? Like this, they're asking a real literal question. They're not asking for a religious script,
Yeah. And it seems like, again, going back to compartmentalizing, like putting things in boxes, it seems like even testimony and gospel script are in two separate boxes. But what I appreciate about the example that you just laid out is you can see how they're both infused, like how God's story intersects with Danny's story, and how you're able to now share the hope of the gospel and how it's impacted you. So I think there's like a blending of the two, where it's like, one of the things we did in a previous class is like did one of those randomized wheels, and we said, all right, we're just going to guess on different situations and roll the wheel and say, okay, now you got to share the hope that's within you to somebody struggling with fill in the blank. And it was an interesting experiment, because all of a sudden now they had to listen to the problem at hand, and they're able to share the hope that speaks into that problem directly, based on their own story of how it's impacted them, of how it's helped heal their shame, how it's helped, give them courage, how it's helped them feel more belonging. So there's a whole different variety of things that the gospel speaks into. And I think that's why we don't get like a cookie cutter, like boom, 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 boom.
And I think too, like I will say that this is a very personal, emotional thing. Right? Like our faith is a very personal thing. Like a lot of our transformation experience has been really like emotional experiences for us, radical transformation. And it can be really easy to feel awkward if somebody asks us these questions, because like they don't realize how personal the question is, right? Like, why do you go to church? Like for you, it's like, well, it's the most significant thing in my entire life. And like, they just want to know, like, do you get anything out of it? Like they're just asking you a real basic question. And I do feel like there's always a temptation when people, for a lot of folks who maybe are not like me, strong, like I get awkward in conversations about deep emotional things with people. And so there's a temptation to use sarcasm, to use like these different channels to just get out of the conversation, right? So if somebody says, hey, why do you go to church? It's like, I'm just looking for like the jokey thing I can do to get out of this conversation. Like, oh, well, they got great parking up there. And we got an amazing coffee shop, right? And it's like, sometimes I know people who use that like as a tactic to kind of like build rapport. But like for me, it's like, if I do that, it's like, I'm trying to get out of this conversation because it's like, oh, this is too personal, too emotional. I don't want to talk to this person about it. So I have to reset my brain in that moment of like, they're asking me a genuine question about the most important thing in my life. And the mission of my life is to share my hope with people. So it's like, answer honestly. Like, don't tell them you go to church because of neighborhood coffee. Like, tell them you go to church, why you actually go to church. And so I do think we have to be aware that oftentimes when we get into these conversations, the part of the reason we walk away and feeling like we blew it is wrong. Like, oh, I missed the script. Part of the reason we walk away and blow it is probably true, where it's like, man, I had this opportunity and I didn't share honestly. I shared some weird sarcastic answer because like I got embarrassed. Like, and so it's fine. Like, go back and try better next time. Or sometimes you can actually circle back and be like, hey, you asked me when I went to church. I gave you a silly answer because I hadn't really thought about it. I thought about it more like, this is the reason why, right? So circling back is fine too. But I do think there is something in us that like, whether it's like spiritual warfare or the flesh or whatever it is that like doesn't want to be vulnerable in this moment, which now we go back to like, be soft-hearted, be humble-minded and share the truth.
So this entire passage closes with the style in which you're supposed to do this. And so it says, do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So we've talked about a lot in this podcast episode, a lot about lifestyle choices, a lot about, inviting people to see the hope that is within you based on the way that you're living and doing it in such a way that's humble, soft-hearted, all these different things. And then we finally begun to open our mouth and share our story, how the gospel has spoken into our story in a relational way. Talk to us about the posture, because I know one of Austin's thing he said last week was, all right, tone is everything. Tone is everything. And so what can we learn through this text and how it lands on doing this with gentleness and respect? It seems like Peter, again, is tripling down on the way you do this so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So where do you think Peter wants to land this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just good advice. Like, I think, go back to the guy who gave butter to the contestant in the cooking contest. It's like they go and interview this guy after the thing. Just imagine if he gets up and says like, hey, why did you do this? He's like, listen, I'm a champion. I don't care how much butter I give her. I'm going to beat her because I can destroy anyone. And honestly, Pamela over here is a chump and I can't believe she wouldn't share it. I'm just a better person than her. Right. And so you know what? Like, as you saw in the results today, I won. I could bake her cake for her 90% and I'll still win because I'm the best. So I'm going to win. It's like, all right, man, like, nobody likes that guy. It's like, okay. Like, we were actually intrigued at like this beautiful gesture that you made. And now we're just like, ew. Right. But in contrast, if instead he's like, hey, you know what? Like, if I want to win this competition, but I want to win fairly. And I grew up learning that you just serve everybody. Like, I just, felt for her. That thing could happen to me too. I would hope somebody would do that for me, but I wish her the best. And, I ended up winning today, but it was a good, healthy competition. It's like, A, you're like, man, what a guy. And then B, like, I just skipped the whole time I'm watching him say that. I'm picturing this Pamela girl. I don't know if that was her name, but the girl who didn't give the butter. And I'm like, she's probably mortified right now. Cause like now on TV, this guy's the hero. And she was like the person who like wasn't raised right. Like didn't like, doesn't like to share, like wants to win the wrong way. Like, and he wasn't like throwing shade at her on purpose, but it's like when he was just being honest about why he did good, like now she's ashamed of herself doing bad. And so it's the exact same thing Peter's talking about. It's like you get an opportunity to share your hope. And it's like, if you start by saying, unlike some people, it's like, okay, but if it's yours, like, hey, wow, like we know you did all the work on that project. You got no credit. Pamela took the credit for this project and like, you just came back to work smiling the next day. Well, why is that? And if you're like, well, Pamela's a jerk, we all know that. It's one thing. If you say, well, hey, you know what? I don't think ill of anybody. Like my job is to do my job. I wanted to do my job well. And I'm glad that I got to contribute. It's like, oh my gosh, right? She's amazing. And then Pamela over in the corner is like, oh no, why am I such a jerk? So I just think it's practical advice that if you get an opportunity to share the gospel, this is not time to get smug. This is not time to brag about your religion. This is not time to make fun of a bunch of other religions. Like, this is time to share honestly how Christ has transformed you. And if you do that well, and honestly and humbly, and keeping with all these character qualities we've talked about throughout this passage, chances are that the people who are coming against you are going to be ashamed, even more than if you were actively trying to shame them, just because that's how grace and poise works. Like, this is why athletes, after winning a game, always give credit to their team and give credit to God. And like like Steph Curry is never going to say like, well, yeah, I'm the best of all time. And it's like, even though he's going to get up there and be like, I've got a great team and these guys played great today. I was really excited about the rookies. They really stepped up. And honestly, like Jonathan Kuminga is the guy who came off the bench. He's going to like defer all of that. It's like, this guy, man, is amazing. That's just like part of being a humble person. It's like when they start whining about the refs and all that, you're like, okay, never mind. You know, like, so anyway, it just feels a lot more practical to me than anything else. Just like, this is just how you're a good person. It's like, don't be all petty if you get an opportunity to share the gospel. Don't be all fake humble. Just be real and be a good person and let that good personness come out. And it's going to be way more powerful than some polished speech, some like shady speech. Like, it's going to be better. Just trust me. Do it with gentleness, respect. Don't finish the speech and have to go and confess to God that you sinned while giving it. Clear conscience. And hey, maybe they'll be ashamed of how they've treated you because you didn't throw them under the bus when you could have.
So we previewed that next week we're going to be in Acts 17 talking about the actual content, learning the content of the gospel so well that in conversations we have something to say, like in this, always be prepared. And so for now, based on this 1 Peter 3 text, what are some ways that we can continue to grow in our ability to share the hope that's within us? What do you think the calls to action are here?
Yeah, and some of this is, we'll talk more about next week, but I think reflection is a big part of that, like reflecting on these things when you're not in the moment. So it's like, these are some basic questions. Somebody might ask you, hey, why do you go to church? Hey, why are you such a good person, right? Which you're going to be like, I'm not a good person, I'm a terrible, but like, what would you say in those moments? Like, have a little daydreaming session and reflect on, hey, if somebody, right? It's like maybe next time you're down because everybody's making fun of you at work, it's like, just imagine, what if somebody came up to you and just said, hey, I know we make fun of you a lot, but like, you always have such a good attitude. Like, what is that? Like, what would you say? Think about what you'd say. So it kind of just, you have an honest answer when it comes out. So I think reflect on it ahead of time. I think in a moment like that, I would say don't punt to a gospel script, like, and leave reality to it. And also don't like punt to like, I just got to get out of this conversation as quickly as possible. Like, take your time, take a deep breath, reflect honestly, and give them an answer. And you don't have to give them a speech. Just give them something substantive, and then give some space for them to respond. So if they're like, hey, why do you go to church? And you're like, well, honestly, church has totally changed my life. And I love going just because it continues to change my life. You could just leave it at that. And maybe they're like, wow, tell me more about that. Or maybe they're like, oh, thanks. Or maybe they're like, oh, that's weird. But I think sometimes we give these like super long speeches because we want to get everything out. So, hey, just give them the next portion of what is true. And then third, I would say, don't be afraid to circle back. So it's like, if you botch it or you think about something later, it's like, I don't think it's awkward most of the time to go back and say, hey, you asked me yesterday why I go to church. I told you just because I've got a lot of good friends there. And that's totally true. It's funny. I thought about that a lot last night. Like, your question just kept ringing in my ears. And the more I thought about it, I really think the biggest reason I go to church is like, it's totally changed my life. And I just want to be honest with you that, like, I've got great friends there, but I've gone through a lot. I'm not the person I was 10 years ago. And I think God has a lot of credit to be given in that. And so just felt like as I thought about it more, it's like, there's more to the story. So anyways, thanks for asking, but it really made me think about my own life, and it was a really humbling exercise for me, but just wanted to give you my revised answer. It's like, and you're not trying to pressure anything. It's like, but now you've got two opportunities, because circling back is generally an appropriate way that humans communicate. I thought about it more, and actually let me revise my answer. And that only works when you're answering like genuinely. And when the question's a genuine question. And so that's why part of the reason there's a power in making these organic connections with people is in the context of relationship, you can circle back. So Don't be afraid to circle back. And then fourth, like, don't beat yourself up. Like, you grow as you do this. God uses everything. I was telling a story earlier this week about a buddy who we were in high school, and he brought a non-believer on a church trip with him. And he asked the non-believer, like, hey, are you going to heaven or hell when you die? And the guy's like, oh, I think I'm going to heaven. I don't know. And he's like, what? And he like stood up in the bus and he pointed at him and laughed and said, you're going to hell. What's wrong with you? And the guy who just got accused of going to hell, he told me later, he's like, man, that was the moment that I gave my life to Christ. Whoa. Like, I was so struck with, I'm like, okay, I will never teach this in evangelism class. And this is what you should do. That's everything not to do, but hey, it works, And so God can use anything. God can use your botched like story. God is using you in the process of drawing people to himself. You're part of that process. So don't be afraid to, don't beat yourself up if you don't do it the way you wanted to. God's going to use your effort more than he's going to use your precision.
I think that's so encouraging, and hopefully it encourages you to get out there and have a conversation. Be curious, step into those conversations, trusting that the Lord's going to guide you. And Pastor Danny, until next week, we only got one more week of the series.
I know. We got Acts 17, and then we close after that. Yeah, so 2 weeks total. Okay. But yeah, one more week after next one. But yeah.
There we go. All right. Until next time.